Good evening, comrades. Thank you for joining us to the Communist Culture Club, third one that we're doing. Tonight, we're just looking at two items because we thought we want to give them enough space to discuss them properly. First of all, we'll have McShane introducing the Palestinian author and poet Mourid Barghouti. And then we'll have Simon Hanna talking about the film In Time.
So thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak on Mourid Barghouti. And in a way, it's a little bit like, anybody's ever listened to it, that a radio show on BBC4 called Great Lives, that somebody who's really interested in a person speaks about them, but they have an expert as well. So it's in that sense that I'm speaking about Mourid Barghouti. I'm not an expert on him, but he's somebody that I think is really worth knowing about and reading his stuff, because for me, he's just been such an inspiring writer in so many ways. Not because he idealizes the struggle in Palestine in any sense, far from it, but because he has made me understand in a way that perhaps only a person who had visited Palestine and Israel would exactly kind of more about the ways in which the struggle presents itself to a Palestinian and to people living in Palestine. So just to begin with, like as an Irish person living here in Ireland at the present time, it's clear that our cultural history and the Palestinian struggle are very closely connected. At the demonstrations and at meetings, there are always songs and poetry, and so many people are writing poems and songs about Palestine, some of them really very beautiful, some of them very militant, some of them not so great, but many of them really good. And so we've had joint events where there's been Palestinian and Irish music and poetry performed at, and it's been very interesting. And like there is this issue of the of the culture of struggle, and actually it's a funny one, because for me, I feel that the kind of idealized culture of struggle I don't like. The one where everybody's heroes and nobody's afraid, and where the enemy needs to look out because we're going to vanquish him. But I do like the struggle represented in the writing of those who can properly give it its due, its expression and its humanity. And for certain, that I believe that Mourid Barghouti was able to do that, and to do it in a way that helps you to think about yourself as a human being and kind of reflect on the kind of struggles that are facing Palestinians and what they mirror to us all about our lives and the kind of world that we live in. So just firstly, to say a few words about Mourid Barghouti. He was born in 1944 near Ramallah in Palestine, in the village of Deir Ghassana. He was the second of four boys, and when he was born was 4 years before the Nakba. And as a small boy, he became aware of his village suddenly becoming crowded with lots of refugees, and aware therefore of the Nakba in that sense, in that it was reflected around him, but his family actually didn't experience any hardship in that time. He left Palestine in 1963-64, and he went to Egypt, and he studied English in Cairo University until 1967. He married an Egyptian writer there, and they set up home together. So he was there for 10 years, and they had a baby together. And then he was involved in kind of supporting Palestinian activities. He was involved in the PLO, but he never joined Fatah. In fact, he had a lot of criticism for Yasser Arafat and said that he really wasn't a Democrat. So anyway, he married Radwar Anshour. She was an Egyptian writer. And in 1967, he graduated just as the 1967 war had broken out, and therefore he wasn't able to return home. Then, as I said, he was there in up to 1977. He was involved in a radio station called Radio Palestine, where he read the news and did various other things. This radio station went through different phases. It was closed down by Anwar Sadat. When he came to power, reopened and then reclosed. In 1977, he criticized Sadat when Sadat visited Jerusalem. He criticized him for his connections and his basically prostrating himself before the Israelis. Sadat responded really angrily and demanded that he be kicked out of the country. And one morning, he opened his apartment door to Egyptian police, who handcuffed him and took him to the airport, and he was expelled from Egypt. And he went to live in Hungary, in Budapest, where he spent 13 years, and then was only finally allowed back to Egypt in 1995 when he was taken off the blacklist. So obviously that was a tremendously long time, not only to be exiled from your own country, but exiled from your country where you were living with your wife and your young son. So in 1995, he then also was able to return to Palestine because of changes made under the Oslo Agreement. And in that time, after that time, once he did return, he lived in Palestine on and off. He lived between Palestine, Jordan, and Egypt, more or less, for the rest of his life. He, in fact, took a position up in the Palestinian Authority. He was offered a position to prepare a history of their archaeological and artistic and other cultural places of significance. But then he found that the money that had been assigned to it had all disappeared into somebody's pockets, and he complained about it, and the bosses defended the people who had stolen the money, the other bureaucrats who'd stolen the money, and then they tried to buy him off. He arrived into work one day and into his office, and there were like new leather chairs, which drove him completely crazy and made him even more determined to resign and to have nothing to do with it. Now, it's interesting, like he says of that experience in an interview and also in his book, that the Palestinians are not a beautiful landscape. They are people who make mistakes, including corruption. He did, however, have intense anger at the Palestinian Authority from then on, and would have nothing much to do with it. It put him in a strange position because many of his contemporaries who went back after Oslo were actually on the Palestinian Authority. And even you yourselves may know people who've done that. I myself have met people who were really principled fighters and, would never have given in to the kind of corruption that they subsequently did when they went back and they joined the Palestinian Authority. So, okay. So within his writing, his poetry and his prose, and I'm not familiar really with his poetry, I'm much more familiar with his prose, having read his two memoirs. The themes of displacement and the themes of occupation are very much to the fore. His son, Tamimi, is also a very well-known poet now in his own right. And again, I wouldn't be very familiar with him. A lot of his stuff hasn't been translated into English. And he's very uncompromising in that he always writes in the kind of the local language, and I believe that it is extremely hard to translate because of that in order to retain the meaning of what he's saying. He's also a performance poet. If you see him, I've seen videos of him speaking, like reciting his poetry, and he does seem like a really energized individual who's expressing his anger and passion very well in Arabic, in the Arabic of Palestine. So what I want to do is I just want to say a few words about each of his memoirs, and hopefully I can convey to you what I think is so beautiful about his writing. His book, I Saw Ramallah, was written after his first visit back to Palestine in 1995. This was after 30 years of exile, and he found himself on the bridge called the Kamara Crossing, which is the only border between Jordan and the West Bank. It's got various names. The Jordanians call it King Hussein Bridge, but the Palestinians just call it the bridge. He describes being there and like looking at his surroundings and feeling that there was nothing ostentatious at all, or nothing grand, or particularly historic about being where he was and those surroundings. It's quite a small bridge over a river that had a very sluggish flow that day. I believe the River Jordan is not an immense river at all, but particularly not at that point of crossing. The bridge is controlled on one side by the Jordanians and on the other side by the Israelis. And so he crossed over, and he met, the first person he met was an Israeli soldier. And he looks at this man, and he starts to kind of wonder about him. And one of the interesting things about Mourid Barghouti is how he surveys the Israelis. He doesn't have, that anger in him that you would expect. He kind of is like quite dispassionate about them. He thinks like they seem to be some sort of a strange species to him. He's wondering, how can that person incorporate the project within his own being? What is he like when he's at home? So this soldier was standing there with a big gun and, obviously fully ready to take him out if he needed to. But he wondered about him, what his background was, who he was at home, how did he incorporate his inhumanity, the inhuman project that he's part of, with his human self. Then he looked, there was a poster of Masada, which is a mythological struggle of the Israelis where they refused to surrender in a particular battle. And he describes this as perhaps this poster being there on the crossing as a signal to Palestinians that the Israelis are never going to give up. Then he moves from there into the clearinghouse for people coming over the border. And the first people, again, to greet him there are the Israelis. And he has to go through the machine and be checked and, whatever. And then after that, he has to fill in these forms. So he goes to hand the form back to the Israeli soldier or police officer. Police officer says, okay, fine. Now you hand that to the Palestinian police officer. So he hands it to the Palestinian police officer. Then he says, Palestinian police officer, what do I do? He said, hand it back to the Israeli police officer. So here you have a situation where the Palestinian security forces are just completely under the control of the Israelis in terms of who's going to be allowed into the West Bank. And he says of the man, the Palestinian policeman, it was clear that the agreements, meaning the Oslo agreements, placed him in a position where he could make no decisions. So he's completely powerless. Then he went closer. Then he got in a taxi and he went to Jericho and then into a taxi to Ramallah. And on his journey back, he looks at the land around him and he said, oh, it's not like how I imagined it would be. It looked very dry and there didn't seem to be the olive trees and the fruit trees that he'd remembered. And he thought about how, when you would hear Palestinians in exile speak about the land, how they spoke about how rich the land was, how green the land was. And he wondered whether, this was a mythology or whether actually things had happened, whether the land had been destroyed in the 30 years since he left. At the beginning, when he goes over the checkpoint, there's lots of Israeli flags. And then as they move away towards Ramallah, the Israeli flags start to thin out and you see Palestinian flags, and he settles back and he starts to feel more comfortable. But then the Israeli flags start to emerge again. And he talks about how when the road gets good, the Israeli flags start to emerge, and then you start to see the settlements. And he talks about like how a feeling of depression came over him, something that he didn't want to admit to, a feeling of secure, that there wasn't really any security there, that this really wasn't Palestine that he was returning to. And he talked about how he saw these settlements up on their stepped hills and with their white stone and tiled roofs. And if you look, well, if you've been there, you've seen them. But if you look at any program on the West Bank settlements, you'll see how they are generally up a hill, sloping down. And they do look to me like quite strange, something otherworldly about them. Anyway, he says, how did we let them build all these cities, these fortresses, these barracks, year after year? And he refers to how a friend of his told him about how near his own village, the lights of the settlements proliferating year after year until finally they encircled the whole village. They had gradually, and in the shade of our own long silence, spread everywhere. And he wonders, like, how did they let this happen? How did the Palestinian Authority agree to something that could facilitate these settlements in the Oslo Agreement? And basically, like, I suppose he's so angry. And then he says, I'm just going to read this quote because I think this is very interesting for us. He says, if you hear a speaker on some platform use the phrase, dismantle the settlements, then laugh to your heart's content. These are not children's fortresses of Lego or Meccano. These are Israel itself, Israel the idea and the ideology and the geography and the trick and the excuse. That these weren't an aberration. These aren't something that could simply be stopped on an individual basis. These were the program. The settlements, he said, are also the Palestinian diaspora itself. So the displacement of the Palestinians and the replacements with the settlements. So that's like an image of how the Israeli program is spreading out and moving the Palestinians out. And I also think the image of the village being surrounded by the settlements is a very like strange and vivid one. Okay, so then I just want to move on to say a few words about the second memoir. So the first memoir was about him going back and about everything through his eyes. And it's interesting because he does talk about himself as somebody who he's not particularly gregarious. Maybe his years in exile have made him like, less able, but he wants to talk to his people, but he doesn't actually seem to speak a lot. What he does do very effectively when you read him and you can see it is like absorb his surroundings, absorb the characters and the situation into him like as a sponge and be able to write people afterwards. That's how he describes how he does when he's angry with the Palestinian Authority, he will write them afterwards. When he meets people along the road who interest him or he sees as his comrade in arms, he will write them. He will try to be the scribe that puts down in words the experience of the Palestinians. So in the second memoir, I was born there, I was born here. This is about a trip that he made with his son to Ramallah in 2008. And before this trip, he talks about going on his way to go and meet his son in Cairo. He's going to Jordan, and how he talks about an incident that happened on his way to the bridge to go to Jordan. So he gets into this taxi that's been driven by this man, Mahmoud. And the taxi driver has got, I don't know, 6 or 7 other passengers, which is common, that's how they would get around. And he has decided that he's going to avoid the Quilandria checkpoint, which is the official checkpoint on the way between Ramallah and Jericho. So they don't want to go there for understandable reasons, like so many people are turned back at checkpoints and some people don't have all their papers, etc., etc. Anyway, so basically this taxi driver has worked out that he's going to go this route, all the back roads of the West Bank. And as he starts off, he gets a phone call that says that basically the Israeli government has warned foreign diplomats that they're not to go anywhere near the bridge after the next 12 hours because there's going to be an Israeli attack. So they get to know of this because of the fact that the foreign diplomats are told. The Palestinians themselves only find out through their own sources. So anyway, so they get on these back roads, and they get stuck in mud. He describes all the people in the car, the fat man, this man, the lady with the veil that's fully covered. And then they pull it out of the mud and they put it back on the road. And then they come across this trench on the road. And this is very common. What happens is that the Israeli army basically blow up parts of the road in order to prevent the Palestinians taking the back road. So they get stuck here and there's this big ravine and they can't get across. So Mahmoud, the driver, he just gets out and he makes a phone call, and next minute they see this crane appear alongside these trees, and these 2 lads come out of behind the crane, and they bring it over, and basically they get the car, and all of them in the car, the 8 of them in the car, are picked up by this crane and deposited up in the air and over to the other side of the ravine. And he speaks about the absurdity of it as they all sat there in the car staring downward at the abyss and the abyss staring back at them. And eventually they did get across safely, and they all got out of the car and they were celebrating, and they looked at each other in relief and joy, he says, as though it was a dream fulfilled, as though we had scored a victory over someone. So, they were really happy at this. Obviously, they had survived it, which was a joy to them, but also it was an adventure that they had embarked on, and just gave them great happiness. And he says, people under occupation may be among those most given to festivity, most ready to celebrate. Very unlike the image of the stereotypical image of everybody being unhappy, everybody being angry and oppressed in their minds all the time. Actually, people look for joy in very small things, very small victories. I think actually, like, just to say, in my experience here in Cork, on St. Patrick's Day, there had been a plan for there to be a Palestinian entry on the St. Patrick's Day parade. And around that time, there were so many people being killed in Gaza. I thought, no, there's no way, we shouldn't be putting those people through that. But in fact, when they had it, it was absolutely fantastic. It was a really joyous occasion. It was a Palestinian wedding, and they had petals and children dancing and kites, and it won the Spirit of the Parade award. and ended up, basically going viral on social media. And so what I had thought was something that would be kind of intolerable for people to go out and be happy when their relatives are being murdered was actually something which they really enjoy doing. So in any event, he speaks afterwards about the fact that this journey that he had made that day was actually part and parcel of everyday life for people in Palestine. And obviously that was in 2008, and you would think that, that's something now that's even more the case today. So he then says that the next morning, having got to Jordan safely, he woke up. Next morning, the dead and the wounded lay scattered in their hundreds. So that was such a contrast to their experience that day, their kind of adventure across the back roads of the West Bank. Then he collects his son and he takes him there, and that book, that memoir, is mostly about how his son Tamim sees Palestine, how he kind of absorbs it, how he becomes part of it, and how he sees it through his eyes, with Mourid more or less taking a back seat and watching what happens. So, Mourid is a lot more angry in some ways. He's been left without his father for many years. In Egypt, he can't get citizenship because his father is Palestinian and only his mother is Egyptian, so he's not entitled to Egyptian citizenship. So he would be a stateless person, essentially. And this is obviously a consequence of the war in Gaza. The experiences of Palestinians in the neighboring Arab countries is, not at all a good one. And they are usually seen as the other, even though in many cases, such as in Jordan, they can be in the majority. Okay, well, look, I know I've spoken for quite some time now, and I just want to finish by basically saying a few words of one of his poems. I'm not a great poetry reciter, so you'll forgive me. I'm good at reading things, but I'm not a performer or an artist. Actually, it's not actually a poem at all. It's a piece of his writing, of his prose. So he's here remembering, because lots of the time in his writing, in his memoirs, he's remembering people and he's remembering situations and he's telling you about them, like as he's, going through his experience, going through his journey, he's remembering them back. So he's remembering about how he was kicked out of Egypt and how he said that this would be the last slap in the face that he would take from that regime. He says, "I am not a piece of music, and I am not a play contemplating men's destinies on a darkened stage. I am a father, a husband, a man with a cause, a poet, a son, and an uncle. I'm an adult, and I'm supposed to provide answers and not just questions. I got used to my expulsion from Egypt and have made old news. I walk the roads of the world, turning that page and trying with all my might to forget it. Life, though, taught me that you have to be free in order to choose, or be confused, or decide, or demolish, or build, or forgive, or apologize, or accept, or refuse likewise. And here's the rub. You have to be free in order to forget. The world didn't let me be free, so I could forget." So that's it from me.
Thank you very much. And I mean, that was worth waiting for, wasn't it? Thank you. Thank you, Comrade. If you have any comments or questions, please click raise hand and I can bring you in. I mean, I quite liked, I read up a bit about him today, and he he describes himself, so he makes a big point about this is not resistance poetry, this is not exile poetry, but clearly, I mean, what he writes is as an exiled person, isn't it? I mean, he does write from that perspective. It would be very difficult, I think, from somebody with that background and that life and biography to write not about resistance, etc. Do you think? But why do you think he describes it as not wanting to be seen as resistance poetry?
Well, I think he wants to be able to talk about mundane things and to talk about, the ordinary things in people's lives and the ordinary beauty of the world. He doesn't want to have to write in grand words about the heroism of the resistance. He doesn't want to sentimentalize it. Like, I like the fact that he's not showing the Palestinian people as absolute heroes, he's critical of them. He's critical of the fact, particularly, of course, critical of the fact that the Palestinian Authority have given away so much. And then in other ways, he's critical of them for letting I think he's very critical generally of them letting the Israelis take so much. He also, and I didn't mention this, he's very critical of the rise of Islam. He speaks, maybe it was in that piece you read, Tina, about living in Egypt under Nasser, and said that it was a fantastic place to be. The culture was just everywhere. You got to go to theatre and musical events and whatever really cheaply, and it was secular. He really, you could see that even how he describes the veiled woman in the piece that I referred to, that he's not keen on any of that. He was a secular individual. I should have said that he died in 2021.
So he was a follower of Nasser, or like many sort of secular Arabs.
Yes.
Were. Yeah. I also see that he wrote quite interestingly about the Oslo Agreement, where he's, a lot of people on the left still hold up the Oslo Agreement as some brilliant way forward, if only, there hadn't been the assassination, etc. But he wrote, in his view, the Oslo Agreements were not the work of leaders, but of people led and dictated to by the Israeli authorities and Western powers. Every serious problem, sovereignty, refugees, the status of Jerusalem, they were all postponed. They divided a cake which is imaginary, which is a very nice way of putting it. Did he put forward anything in his poetry about his vision of how Palestine could be free?
No, well, I think that he didn't have a political program. He just simply wanted Palestine to be free. I think he didn't want there to be any compromises. Like, he was critical, as well as the Palestinian Authority, he was also critical of Hamas, said that they were quite infantile in how they dealt with the Israelis, that the Israelis were far too clever for them. So I think that he believed that you had to stand firm against the Israelis and stop them taking the land. And he obviously, when he went back to work for the Palestinian Authority, he obviously believed in Palestinian nationhood and hoped that they would get something out of the deal. I think it wasn't until afterwards that he realized how bad a deal it was after that journey, in 1995. So I would say he was a secular Palestinian nationalist. Yeah, that's what I would say. I mean, not a nationalist in the sense of an Arab nationalist, rather than it's certainly not a Muslim, an active practicing Muslim.
No, you certainly presented him very well, and I shall have a look at his books. I've not read him, I have to admit. Who reads him? I mean, is he very famous amongst the Palestinians? I mean, this is a sort of interesting question, isn't it? Do Palestinians, when you're struggling to survive, when when you don't know where tomorrow's food's coming from, do you have time? Do you have the headspace to look at poetry, to read, and to, look into culture?
Well, he's very well known among Palestinians. When I've asked Palestinians I know here about him, they kind of, they refer to him as one of the greats. And oh, absolutely, people are completely into poetry and song. It's just part of their lives, I think. Like, that's been my experience. And I think that, like, that question that you referred to there is how people express their opposition, their struggle through culture is a fundamental one for people who are in struggle. And I suppose, I wouldn't want to say that Ireland is unique, because obviously it's not unique. People all over the world who have struggles, people produce, their cultural, their songs and their poetry and their music and their drama all over the world. But in struggle, I suppose Ireland is quite unique, and then so is Palestine. So they do meet, and sometimes it can be, like I see Jerry there, it can be really mythologized, and sometimes it can be a bit boring. I used to think when I was growing up some of it, but it's amazing, like speaking in Ireland, how it's become very popular again. How many of the old stuff is coming back again. But I think that for people who are in struggle, songs and poetry are very important. Yeah, exactly. Terry was talking about South Africans, exactly. Music, yeah.
I think I've seen an interview with Mourid Barghouti that he also said he often read in refugee camps and stuff, and there were always packed tents of people wanting to listen to him, speak to him afterwards, etc., and share experience. So thank you very much, and that was really very interesting. Anything else you want to say about him?
No, I think, well, hopefully I'll been able to give you something of an idea of how he writes, but I would recommend him. They're short books. He doesn't write in long flowing sentences, and the translations of him are apparently very, very good. I can only say that to me, they read really beautifully.
Great. Unless there's any questions from the audience, please click raise hand. Otherwise, we'll let you go. I know you need to go to another meeting.
That's okay.
Palestine meeting, is it? So thank you very much,
Palestine organizing meeting.
Okay, thank you. We'll let you go then. That was very good. Comrades, if you come across any poet, any writer that you want to introduce, I think Anne did a really good job of how it can be done. So please don't feel shy about it. Come along, and we can listen to you. Next item, I'm really interested in this, is looking forward to it, is Simon Hanna. Hi. I've seen a few weeks back a Facebook post of Simon's where he referenced a film I'd never heard of called In Time. And he asked, is this the most Marxist film ever? What? Looks totally like an action thriller, Netflix. It's out there. It's got Cillian Murphy, it's got Amanda Seyfried, it's got Justin Timberlake in the main roles, etc. So it's a really big blockbuster, and I'd never even heard of it, and I don't think many people have. So Simon, thanks very much for coming along. Before we get started, so I thought we show quickly the trailer, because it does give a bit of an insight into what this film is all about. This is the international trailer, I should say. The one for the home audience is really, really bad. It's really just running around and shooting at things. This is quite good, so let's watch it.
Just want something to have more time in my hand than hours in the day. Where's the rest?
Never met the quota.
My units are up from last week.
So is the quota. 2 hours.
It's always been an hour.
Now it's 2. Price went up.
It's a 2-hour walk. I have an hour and a half.
Then you better run.
The poor are meant to die. It's how the system works. What the hell's that supposed to mean?
You really don't know, do you? How old are you in real time?
28.
I'm 105. The truth is, there's more than enough time for everyone. There are men with 1 million years while most live day to day. For a few to be immortal, many must die.
No one should be immortal if even one person has to die.
You're not from around here, are you?
Why would you doubt that?
You're a little different.
Come with me.
The cameras picked up suspicious behavior.
His name is Will Salas.
He shouldn't be there.
What are we gonna do? Steal?
Is it stealing if it's already stolen? I'm gonna make them pay.
Come on, help yourselves.
Take the time, it's free.
Where did you get that?
We can't have 1,000 years in the wrong hands. It could cripple the system.
I will stop him.
The problem is, everybody wants to live forever.
We're not meant to live forever.
You know we're coming to get you.
Let's hope so.
His crime wasn't taking time. He was giving it away.
So that looked like an action thriller, didn't it? Mainly. Explain to us then, please. How does it make it a Marxist film, you think?
Okay, thanks, Tina. Yeah, I'll give a kind of like 15-minute kind of introductory presentation, and then we can have a discussion about it. So, and thanks for inviting me to give the talk. It just goes to show, be careful what you write on Facebook, because someone might see it and then invite you to give a talk and ask you to justify your point. Yes, but I mean, I would start off by saying that when I described it as the most Marxist movie ever, I just want to qualify that statement because you know, it's not a movie about sort of particularly focused around workers as workers and, you know, the kind of classic class struggle that we might understand. Doesn't use the word socialism or, you know, or like all these other things. But I think in terms of the way the movie understands economics and the kind of class struggle that emerges from that economics, I think it is fundamentally, you could argue, Marxist in its approach. I don't know if the director has ever read Marx or, you know, studied Capital or anything like that, but certainly the way that the concept of time is used in the movie, I think, is Marxist. And as you saw in the trailer, it is also a revolutionary movie. I mean, it's about, you know, the poor versus the rich, and can you have fundamental social radical change which redistributes time? So before I go to talk a bit more about the movie, it's worth noting that the writer and director Andrew Niccol also made the 1998 movie Gattaca, which I would recommend. It's a movie, also a kind of dystopian science fiction movie where it's a society where gene editing has reached the point where there's kind of a class of elite, very privileged, very beautiful, very intelligent people who, you know, have everything they want. They have all these amazing jobs, and they're kind of always getting into spaceships and flying off to other planets to, you know, live in these kind of perfect worlds. And then there's other people whose family couldn't afford the gene editing, who couldn't afford to produce perfect babies, didn't have that opportunity in life, and they kind of create this underclass. And so I think Andrew Niccol's very interested in the way that kind of using science fiction to explore aspects of class and social division. He also wrote The Truman Show. I don't know if people have seen that. It's the Jim Carrey movie. Also came out in the 90s, which is a really excellent film about kind of reality TV, ahead of even the concept of reality TV and the perils of 24/7 celebrity culture, which he won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay for. So whilst I would say that In Time is not a perfect movie. I think it fits in with Andrew Nichols's way of thinking, or like using film and culture and science fiction ideas to explore issues around alienation, around class and class struggle. So just to kind of give you a bit more of a background, which hopefully you picked up from the trailer. So in this movie, everyone stops aging at 25. You have this kind of thing in your wrist, which is how much time you have. And so you can get time by working. So Justin Timberlake plays this factory worker, Will, and the movie starts off with him, and he's going and he meets his friend on his way to his shift in this factory, and they want to buy some coffee. So you scan your wrist, and the coffee's gone up from 2 minutes to 4 minutes. And they're complaining about inflation and the kind of cost of living crisis, which I'm sure a lot of us will be familiar because of the inflationary crisis that's happened in Britain as well as other parts of the world in the last couple of years. But then he goes to his shift, he does his day's work, and then when he comes out, you get your hours, but he's kind of shortchanged. He's given fewer hours than he thought he was going to get. And as the guy says in the trailer, well, you didn't meet your quota, or sort of like the quota amount has gone up, and so the amount of time that you receive, which you can then use to live, to pay your rent, to buy food, to travel around, is reduced. And so you can already see there a very kind of simple understanding of sort of class and the class struggle. Now, whilst people are kind of living and struggling with this arrangement, the rich enjoy lives of wondrous splendor. One even refers to the situation as Darwinian capitalism. He says, well, some people are just rich, some people have got what it takes. They've got like 1 billion years like on their arms. They can do whatever they want. There's one scene where he's kind of gambling, and he's like gambling 200 years, just as a kind of like a starting bet, and it's kind of this sort of upping the ante, whereas obviously most people that Justin Timberlake's character knows, they literally have kind of 23 hours on their arm, so they are paid enough money to get back to work the next day. There's no luxury for them. There's no sort of anything apart from the absolute basics. So the people that keep this arrangement going are the timekeepers. You can see in the trailer that one of the main ones is played by Cillian Murphy, who just won the Academy Award for playing Oppenheimer in the Christopher Nolan movie that came out last year. And the timekeepers are, police. They act much like the police do in modern capitalist society. They protect property, and then they ensure the status quo is preserved. However, all is not well in this situation. Will comes across this. Will is Justin Timberlake's character, comes across this kind of very disaffected super rich man called Henry Hamilton, who's been alive, as he says in the trailer, for 105 years. He's sick of life. He's bored. He's got so many years on his arm, and it's just, it's brought him this life of luxury, but he's kind of he's very disaffected. He's alienated, and he wants to die basically. So he kind of gives Will all of his time. So Will goes from having 20 hours on the clock to having 116 years on the clock, and obviously then he becomes the target of kind of bandits who rob people and steal their time, and and so on. So I think this is all a very interesting sort of concept of the way that time is used as a commodity to regulate the economy, to regulate production, and to decide who has wealth and who doesn't. I think it's also worth saying, actually very interesting in the movie, because you can see that the rich have got this kind of very wonderful, abundant life, but they're also quite miserable in a way, sort of in this world, everything's divided up into different cities, and the poor are in one place and then the rich are in other cities. But, it costs you time to get to the different cities. So, and the time is very expensive. It's like 2 months, like minimum. So obviously a lot of people don't have that time to travel. So it means that most people never go and see the cities of the rich, let alone buy anything in these cities. But the rich are very, they have huge wealth, but they're very alienated. They're very miserable because they're so rich, they have to live behind these security walls. They're flanked by security and timekeepers. Their movements are tracked and regulated, so no one can steal their time. So they're very rich, but they're not particularly free. They're not particularly able to live their lives as kind of like in genuine humanity in that sense. So anyway, I recommend watching the movie. I'm going to go and talk a little bit now about the concept of time in Marx, because I want to sort of use the cultural thing as a way to talk a bit about the economics. It is worth saying though that the movie it does have a revolutionary message in it, and there is a fight to redistribute the time to make sure that the time isn't just consolidated in the hands of in the wrists of the super time rich, but is kind of redistributed across society. So I won't tell you what happens at the end, but you can watch the movie around that. So just quickly about the concept of time in Marx. So in Marxism, there is a double meaning of time. There is both the historical concept of time, of course, which we're all familiar with, societies, civilizations, the rise and fall of things like capitalism. So in that sense, time is the medium in which things develop and change, and what you might call the social totality of capitalism takes place. But time is also an object of reification under capitalism. Labor time becomes a commodity that can be used and exploited to extract surplus value from by the capitalists. So, and it's in that double meaning of time that Marx really has a very revolutionary criticism of the system. So they say that time is money. This is a famous quote, but under capitalism, money is also time, because the labor time that workers have in terms of going to work and producing things is a real central battleground of capitalism. It's where we earn the means to live through our wages, but also where bosses extract surplus value that they can use as profit. So the capitalist extracts surplus value from the worker because there is an unequal exchange of labor time between the boss and the workers. So the exploiter can then pocket the difference. So you go into work, you're making things, or you're producing things, you're providing a service, you get paid a certain amount of wages, but obviously you are producing more value than the wages that you are paid. That's where profit comes from. That's where surplus value is so important for Marxism. So bosses can increase absolute surplus value, for instance, by increasing the length of the working day. They can remove rest breaks. They can do any kind of thing that keeps you in work longer. I mean, even in companies like Google, where they pride themselves, they've got like games rooms, and they've got restrooms, and they've got kind of bars and coffee places in the HQ. But that's because they don't really want you to leave the building. They want you to stay in and work as much as you can, even if they try and make it more playful work. But it's still work. They're still trying to increase the working day. And obviously the length of the working day has been a huge battleground for trade unions over the years, as workers, as we fought for the 8-hour day, and now there's people fighting for the 4-day week and so on. So how is time measured by the capitalist class? And this is where Marx is very different to previous early economists like David Ricardo, because people like Ricardo talked about the concrete labor of any specific individual. So you go in, you make something, and that's your concrete labor. But what Marx is interested in is what he calls the abstract labor, how all workers' time and effort is measured against each other. How do you compare the labor of a teacher with the labor of a nuclear engineer? How do you compare the labor of someone who's tarmacking the road with someone who's printing a book? Like, how do you really compare these different functions that workers perform under capitalism? And this is where Marx's understanding of abstract labor and the way that the value is created by units of time, effectively. And this is obviously where I think In Time is quite a Marxist movie in that sense, because they strip out all the money aspect of it. Like, I mean, money is just kind of congealed labor time, really. And they replace it with just literal time, which you get, which you give, which you use to buy things. But I mean, we can even see that today. Like, if you take a £10 note, which you've got from your wages, and you go to a shop and you buy something, that £10 is the congealed labor time that you put into producing surplus value for someone else. And so like all that money is also just a representation of time in that sense, the time that we have been paid for within the the capitalist kind of wage capitalist the capitalist relations. So yeah, I think that's one of the main things I wanted to say around time. It's it's a means of measuring the exploitation of workers. the fight over surplus value extraction is, central to the workers' movement, the trade union struggle, and the fight for the workers and society in general to have control of the surplus is also one of the key aspects of what socialism is. At the moment, the capitalists steal the surplus value from the labor that we produce, from the kind of unpaid hours of our work. And so one of the key things socialism wants to do is take that, which is taken from the workers and reintegrate it into society. Now, in the movie, of course, they do this by literally giving people more time. Under socialism, the reintegration will be the fact that we can decide how the surplus is redistributed in terms of investment or consumption democratically. At the moment, these decisions are not democratic. They are made by capitalists and captains of industry and people like that. But under socialism, we will be able to decide that. So just the final 1 minute, Tina, before you finish, before you wrap me up, I think it's important to consider how time within the workers' movement has also been thought of. So I mentioned the trade union struggles before, but I don't know if some people might know this. During the Paris Commune in the 1870s, one of the first things that workers did was they smashed the clocks, like in the centers of the towns. Why? Because for them, the clocks were there to control their lives. It was to, get you up, get you out, get you into work. You're penalized if you're 15 minutes late, sort of. And so the clocks for those workers represented an oppressive tyranny over their lives. And of course, people were working incredibly long hours each week at that point. If anyone's read The Right to be Lazy by Paul Lafargue, which is a really excellent pamphlet, I really recommend it. He talks about, the title is kind of provocative, but the main argument he's making is that we should move towards a 15-hour week. We can redistribute the work. We can eliminate bullshit jobs, as David Graeber called them, and we can reorganize society according to a rational, ecologically sustainable plan where, yes, we will still have to work. I think, I'm not in favor of anti-work things, but there will still work that needs to be done, but we can reduce the amount of work as much as possible to the bare minimum to free us for more wonderful things with our lives. So social, political, ludic, erotic, recreational activities, which aren't, which are free from just having to go to work, do the 35 or more hours that, people are doing at the moment. So in that sense, I think the concept of time, the fight over time and the revolutionary consequences of how we understand time are very important. And in that sense, I think In Time is it's a pretty Marxist movie. I think it's pretty good.
Thank you very much, Simon. Excellent. It is a very enjoyable film, especially for being a blockbuster. And, there will be lots of moments where you go, ooh, as a Marxist, now, there'll be things like, there seems to be 12 different time zones, if I'd seen it right, and the higher up you go, the more expensive it gets to get there. And then there's a dialogue, it's not illegal to change time zones, is it? And then the copper says, it's not illegal, it's just really rare. And you see things, once you have money, it's almost, it's so easy to quadruple, to get 1 billion out of the 100 million you had, etc. You see the richer getting richer, etc. There's quite a few nice quotes in terms of, talking about alienation. The poor die and the rich don't live. I think she says that to him, Amanda Seyfried, so the rich don't really have a life. They are surrounded by guards. They are stuck in their life, pretty alienated, etc., and feel, they have to protect themselves just to live a little bit. Where I disagree with you slightly is on the redistribution thing. That seems to be something that Marx actually kind of, obviously we don't, the poor, you have to make sure that people don't starve, etc. But for Marx, well, he argued against that, didn't he? That it's not just about redistribution, which people like Lassalle, etc., were arguing, but for him it was who owns the means of production. It's not just about giving it away and the rich still are in charge of everything, how things are produced, etc. We just get all a little bit more, I think, and that kind of that jarred with me a little bit with the film as well, because as you said at the beginning, it's just, you know, two people really making this revolution, isn't it? It's not a mass of people making this revolution. It's those two fucking up the system, basically, you know. And so you don't really have to have a revolution of sorts. You can just sort of flood the market with a lot of time or money in our case, and that would sort of make everything go haywire, and, you know, the rich then just oh well, it's done now. No, the copper says, just put your weapons down, you know, we're not doing this anymore, and you have a sort of a very peaceful revolution. I know it's a film, it's only a film, and he has to bring it to some kind of conclusion. But I think the redistribution, you know, distribution instead of owning the means of production. Do you think there's a slight un-Marxist edge?
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. I mean, like, I think you're right to point that out. Like, that's where it's not. I mean, it understands kind of the redistributionary aspect of it, and like it becomes like a Bonnie and Clyde movie where they're like raiding banks and they're kind of giving everyone the, you know, the time and things like that. So like I think there's very good arguments there around class and the poor and the rich, and, you know, and the dynamics like that. But because it is mainly about raiding banks, it doesn't really deal with necessarily other aspects of, I mean, because Justin Timberlake works in a factory at the beginning of the movie, but then you never see the factory again. So I don't know what happens to the you know, to the factory owners. I guess they're still able to make the money. Well, there's a bit at the end of the movie, because everyone has so much time now, people stop going to work. So I don't know if that indicates there's a more radical thing going to happen in terms of work and things like that. But I think you're right to point out that, you know, like it doesn't really deal with the ownership question. It just deals mainly with other aspects of it.
And he also might have a touch of the anarchist about him, perhaps. You know, I think there's twice they ask the question of, is it stealing if it's already stolen? Which just sounds like, you know, Proudhon and all property is theft. Or as in Oppenheimer, they put that quote onto Marx. Whenever a few people in cinema, when I was, that's not Marx. You know, property is theft, it's Proudhon. So, but you might have that touch. But it's it did remind me of, you know, RAF in Germany, you know, robbing the banks, and then everybody just take your pick of the money. It's free, etc. It's great. It's very good fun. We've got a couple of people now with their hands up, and I'll bring them in. Perhaps they've seen it as well and liked it. It does look at the end sometimes, it looks a bit like a GDR, you know, when they open the borders and everybody just walks into the different time zones. So, you know, if that kind of a revolution would be possible, unfortunately, I think it'll probably involve a few more guns, etc., and people perhaps not, the rich, not just dropping their guns, etc. Oh, one thing was interesting, I think, is the role of, I was wondering your view on that, the role of the copper, you know, the Cillian Murphy guy. He is literally almost the only one who battles till the end and tries to catch him. I mean, all the other coppers seem totally alienated and seem to have no great affinity for this system and just sort of stop. I'm not going to jump out of that window to catch this guy. Why do you think Cillian Murphy is that kind of?
I mean, like, it's kind of hinted at that he knew the main character's father, and the main character's father was also some kind of revolutionary, because there's bits when Justin Timberlake's character starts talking about, you know, hey, how come the poor don't have any time or whatever, and then he's like, you sound just like your father. Look what happened to him. So like there's some kind of hint of. But also it's revealed at the end, sorry, people like spoilers, but the Cillian Murphy his character came from the poor district. So I guess maybe he's got this kind of buy-in where he, you know, he kind of hates the people that he came from, and he, you know, but I don't know, like, it is interesting, like in any revolutionary situation, how the state starts to fracture, and, you know, some of them obviously really double down and do everything to try and prevent the revolutionary change, and others just kind of give up and go home because, you know, the balance of forces has turned against the minority, i.e. the bourgeoisie, and the, you know, the kind of small numbers of security forces that protect them. But yeah, I think that's interesting to kind of wonder like what happened in the background with the father and Cillian Murphy's character.
Or maybe Cillian Murphy was an ally of the father, and the father was killed, and then he said, "Okay, that's me and my revolutionary past."
Sounds like you're going to write the prequel, Tina.
We'll get right on to it. Yeah. Okay, we've got the first question.
Well, I haven't seen the film, but from your description, I'm looking at this as a fundamental flaw, and the fact that the rich cities must have people collecting the waste, doing the cooking, looking after the rich. And where are they in the film? Because surely that is a source of the working class uprising. Do they have slaves? Do they have robots? That kind of thing. And also, a lot of what you're describing is the alienation was caught by Buñuel in the discreet charm of bourgeoisie. That movie was very good at achieving that, and more subtly, I think, maybe, than Mr. Nichols.
Do you want to reply, Simon?
Well, yeah. So when Will gets his 116 years, he goes to kind of the rich New Greenwich, it's called. So he goes there, and he kind of checks into the hotel. So you meet the hotel receptionist, but they're quite kind of snooty. You know, like he's obviously not from around there. And then he speaks to a waitress who works there, and she can also see he's not really from, you know, he's not from money. He's obviously kind of a bit of an interloper. So you do see people, but I mean, I guess it's one of those things where, you know, the workers that are based in these very rich areas, or maybe, you know, like able to commute in, I guess they feel that they, you know, their lives are so dependent on the immediate service provision to the rich that they don't, you know, like, why would they want to? I mean, maybe they have slightly higher wages than the people that work in the factory district. I guess that's the sort of, you know, you do get some sections of the working class, obviously, who identify with the bourgeoisie, and they identify with the system, and they because they don't see an alternative to it, and indeed maybe they are paid a bit more money in order to, you know, kind of keep them sweet. Whereas Justin Timberlake's character is definitely from a kind of city that is, you know, neglected, really run down, you know, like there's just dead bodies in the street because their time ran out, you know, and sort of, so, you know, like, and so, like, I guess the movie is trying to make the distinction between that kind of the haves and the have-nots in a, you know, in a very sort of blunt way, I guess.
The thing about the bank robberies was kind of interesting as well, because I mean, the Bolsheviks earlier, they robbed a lot of banks and stuff, and they used some of the money to organize. And there's nothing in the film about the need to organize, is there? That seemed a bit missing. You know, there's no mass action. There's no need for a party to take any kind of action. Did that bother you a bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, like he didn't have a very clear revolutionary strategy in that sense. It was just two very young, very beautiful people robbing banks and giving time to the other people. So I guess yeah.
It does. I mean, it is interesting that he's the writer also of the Truman story. Truman Show. I didn't even know that. I mean, that is one of the best films of all time. Surely, this is. If anybody hasn't seen it yet, I mean, that would be worth a review as well. Alienation, exploitation, etc. All sorts of issues that are being discussed in the Truman Show is an excellent film. Victor, I think you've got your hand up. Did you want to come in to ask a question? No, put your hand down again. Okay, so we're probably looking at finishing a bit earlier than usual because we haven't got that many questions. But this is a really interesting film, comrades. I urge you to watch it. If anybody would like to make a comment or a contribution, you can still do so. But it is Hollywood films are, of course, I mean, they are, you know, they have to be financed by multimillionaires, etc., by people who have an awful lot of money and, you know, are not probably going to be Marxists or socialists of any kind. But for a Hollywood film, just like Matrix as well, I think somebody mentioned that in the chat. The Matrix is quite a you know, you watch it and you go, whoa, what if this has all just been put on for us? You know, we're not really in charge. There is a facade, you just see the front, and at the back there is something totally different going on. You know, there's people and we think we're in charge, and yet we're just, you know, little puppets being exploited, etc. Also a very good film. So you're obviously a film buff. Is that one of your favorite films, or what's your kind of favorite films?
Oh, you put me on the spot now, Tina. I haven't prepared any answers like that. My favorite films. Oh, I don't know. I mean, you know, I think Terminator 2 is pretty good. That's probably the movie I've seen the most. So maybe I have a bit of a tendency towards
which
action.
Which one? Sorry, I didn't catch that. Which one?
Terminator 2.
Terminator 2.
Come on, it's a brilliant film. I've seen that 100 times.
Terminator 2, is that the
film? Yeah.
Jesus. I'll be back, isn't that one? No.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. I know a quote, but one of the greatest films. Well, I'm glad we caught you doing In Time and not Terminator, because I think that's probably where we had a few more differences of opinion.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So thank you very much, comrades. The film is on Netflix. We're not getting paid by Netflix. So if you can see it somewhere else, it's probably on YouTube. No, I did try to find it actually elsewhere. I could not find it anywhere. I think it's just Netflix. I mean, Google it, perhaps. Do you know if it's anywhere else, Simon?
Oh, I mean, not that I would obviously advocate stealing movies, but I mean, the movie's been out for 12 years now, so I'm pretty sure you can find it somewhere online if you want to see it. Let's just leave it at that.
Yes, you don't get yourself into trouble. It's definitely going class into trouble by saying, Simon told me to.
Yeah.
It's a very good film anyway. It's very enjoyable. It's not, you know, it does have weaknesses in terms of Marx's theory of revolution, but it is enjoyable, and you'll love it, I think, as socialists. You'll love it. Thank you very much, Simon. Comrades, we will see you again next Thursday evening for our third session of the ABC of Marxism with Ian Spencer. So apologies for the technical problems at the beginning, but we've powered through. So thank you very much, comrades. Thank you, Simon. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.